I love cats. The internet loves cats. And it seems that evolution also loves cats, because some very cat-like things have evolved quite a few different times throughout the history of life. When unrelated organisms end up evolving to look very similar to each other, or have very similar features, this is a phenomenon called convergent evolution. It's much more prevalent in animals than you might expect, but this makes sense considering how natural selection operates. The anatomical features that best enable an organism to survive and reproduce will be the ones that get selected for. And so if two unrelated animals have a very similar way of life or live in the same environment, then they can end up looking very much alike. This is seen throughout the fossil record, and even among various living animals, and we've already looked at how turtles, crocs, and moles have all evolved on more than one occasion. The repeated evolution of cat-like creatures is another incredible example of this evolutionary phenomenon, and so that's what we'll be looking at this time. But firstly, what even are cats? How did they evolve? Before we get into all that, I want to introduce you to our cat stars of this episode. Throughout the video, you'll be seeing photos and footage of three very special cats. Firstly, this is Elsa, my family's cat who has been part of our family since I was 12. She's named after Elsa the lioness, star of Born Free, and she's only got 3 legs. We don't know how her leg got injured as she already had it amputated when we adopted her, and there weren't very good records of her prior life. Elsa is about 15 years old and still going strong, happily living at my parents' house. Next, this is Grendel, our newly adopted kitten. She's only 3 months old in this footage and she's absolutely adorable. Her full name is Grendelius mordax, named after an ichthyosaur species I studied for my undergrad research, and because I think it's the perfect cat name. Finally, we're also looking after Grendel's mother, Morgana, who is also a very young cat and still acts an awful lot like a kitten, especially around Grendel. So now you know a little bit about the stars of the episode. Cats are members of the family Felidae, which in turn is part of the feliform suborder, one of the 2 major groups within the order Carnivora. The other major group of carnivorans is called Caeniformia, and this includes all the dogs, bears, badgers, raccoons, skunks, seals, sea lions, as well as others. The feliforms, in addition to including cats, contains hyenas, mongooses, civets, and a few other lineages, including numerous now extinct ones. The cat family Felidae probably split off from other feliforms about 33 million years ago, during a period of time called the Oligocene epoch. Currently, the oldest definite felid we've found fossils of is a kind of animal called Proilurus, which lived just after this time. Proilurus would have looked quite a bit like the living viverids, another group of feliforms related to cats. Its fossils have been found in Europe and possibly also in Asia and North America, and it likely spent a lot of time climbing about in trees. This early stage of felid evolution is actually not particularly well understood at the moment, owing to the scarcity of their fossils from this stretch of geological history. But estimates of divergence times based on molecular evidence of modern animals does fit what's currently represented by the limited fossils we have. So the true cats emerged sometime between around 33 and 28.5 million years ago. After Proilurus, fossils of a creature named Pseudilurus start turning up in the fossil record in Europe, Asia, and North America, from a stretch of time known as the Miocene epoch. Again, the details of cat evolution around this time are quite murky, and the number of species of Pseudilurus is somewhat unclear. It seems likely that Pseudilurus is something called a complex. Essentially, it represents more of a grade or type of prehistoric felid with no strict definition at the moment and multiple names for the different groups of species included. All subsequent lineages of cats then appear to have evolved from within this Pseudilurus grade or something very much like it. Pseudilurus varied in dimensions, with some species being about the size of a wildcat, while others were more puma-sized. Again, these animals were probably quite at home among tree branches, with overall rather slender bodies and generally shortened legs making them adept climbers. One of the lineages that split off from within the Pseudilurus grade was the most famous of all prehistoric felids, the sabre-toothed cats, technically known as the Machairodontines. One Pseudilurus species had quite long upper canines, and so this might represent the early stage of the evolution of the deadly saber teeth, giving rise to the Machairodontines. The oldest true member of the saber-toothed cats that we've found so far is Maiomachairodus, known from fossils found in Turkey and China dating to between 12.5 and 9.5 million years ago. However, the saber-toothed lineage likely originated earlier than this, with genetic evidence indicating that they split from the ancestors of all living cats some 20 million years ago. The saber-toothed lineage gave rise to several different subgroups, including the scimitar-toothed cats such as Homotherium, the metylurines such as Dinofelis, and of course the iconic Smilodontines, including Smilodon, which terrorized prehistoric North America. The saber-toothed cat lived until just 11,000 years ago, with Homotherium and Smilodon being the last surviving species. Now, later in this video we're going to be encountering quite a few other cat-like animals that also had saber teeth comparable to the Machairodontines. And this is actually going to be the topic of another convergent evolution video I've got planned for the future, looking at every time saber teeth evolved. Such teeth appeared in several cat-like lineages as well as numerous not so cat-like ones, so I think that would be fun to explore in another video. Anyway, heading back to the evolution of true cats, the other major subfamilies within Felidae are Felinae and Pantherinae, the so-called conical-toothed cats. Pantherinae includes lions, jaguars, leopards, tigers, snow leopards, and clouded leopards, while Felinae includes every other living cat species. These groups share a common ancestor that lived in Asia, and according to genetic evidence, the two lineages split off from one another some 10.8 million years ago. Both felines and pantherines adapted to all sorts of environments and niches on most of the planet's continents, dispersing from Asia in several different waves over the past few millions of years. By at least 9,500 years ago, humans were domesticating cats, as indicated by archaeological findings on Cyprus that date to this age. These finds include a child buried with a cat, hinting at the strong bonds between species even at this early point in time. Since cats were not native to the island, it shows that Neolithic farmers were bringing these animals to the island from elsewhere. This love that humans have for cats has clearly lasted a very long time, and it's a good job we eventually invented the internet so that we could look at cat videos all day long. I'm sure that's what those Neolithic people intended to happen one day. But, strangely enough, the so-called true cats, the felids, were not the original cats. There are several lineages that appeared earlier on than the felids which look remarkably cat-like. One such example is the family Oxyaenidae. This group first turns up in the fossil record around 59 million years ago, not long after the non-bird dinosaurs had gone extinct. They are not quite members of the order Carnivora, the big group that includes the cats, the dogs, bears, seals, and all the others. So they're not especially close relatives of the true cats, and they have a separate origin from them. However, some species of Oxyaenids do superficially resemble cats. Oxyaenids started off as fairly small weasel-like creatures, but species such as the 50 to 46 million year old Barbourofelidae were about the size of a jaguar and looked a bit more cat-like. Barbourofelidae had proportionally quite short legs and a long body, and seems to have been a terrestrial ambush predator of large animals. They had rather broad snouts, plus flexible elbow joints and forelimbs to help in grappling with prey. Barbourofelidae, like all Oxyaenids, also possessed specialized shearing teeth near the back of the jaws, called carnassial teeth. These are modified cheek teeth that essentially work like scissors, with self-sharpening edges that are very efficient at slicing through flesh. Carnassial teeth are one of the key anatomical traits in a lot of members of Carnivora, and if you watch your dog or cat eating, you'll likely be able to see them biting down with the sides of their mouths. That's them engaging the carnassials. These teeth have convergently evolved among mammals a few times, and they seem to have had an independent evolutionary origin in the Oxyaenids too, another feature that makes them pretty cat-like. Another very cat-like Oxyaenid species is Diegoailurus from California, which is part of the subgroup Machairoidenes. These Oxyaenids also have saber teeth, and they are in fact the oldest known saber-toothed true mammals, so we'll come back to them in the saber-tooth convergence video. Paleonyctus from Europe and North America could also be considered fairly cat-like, as could Sarcastodon, the biggest Oxyaenid we've found so far. This species was uncovered in Mongolia, and may have reached as much as 800 kilograms in weight and 3 meters in length. This beast is known from some very large fossils of the skull, and shows clear adaptations for bone crushing to get access to marrow inside, in addition to having teeth for shearing flesh. So this thing was essentially like a bear-sized hyena-cat hybrid, rather an awesome if somewhat terrifying animal. Related to the Oxyaenids are the Hyaenodonts, which also include some species that might be considered convergent with cats. Despite the name, the Hyaenodonts are not closely related to hyenas, and they don't really have the specializations that hyenas do for bone crunching. Instead, they mostly look more like dogs. These would have been impressive predators too, and they survived for much longer than the Oxyaenids, going extinct around 9 million years ago, whereas the Oxyaenids died out around 40 million years ago. Despite mostly not looking very cat-like, they do again all have convergently evolved carnassial teeth, and there's a particular species called Simbacubwa that I wanted to briefly mention. The name Simbacubwa comes from the Swahili for big lion, and it lived about 22 million years ago in Kenya. It was even larger than a modern lion and was a specialized hypercarnivore, potentially filling a different niche to today's African big cats by specifically going after very large ancient elephants and rhinos. Its skull is still overall quite a different shape to cats though, but it's such a cool species that I had to at least mention it. Another lineage of cat-like mammals that evolved before the so-called true cats belong to a lineage known as Nimravidae, sometimes called the false saber-toothed cats. But since they lived before the saber-toothed cats, really the false saber-toothed cats should be called the real saber-toothed cats, and then the saber-toothed cats would be the false saber-toothed cats. I love convergent evolution. It doesn't get confusing at all. Nimravidae first appeared about 40 million years ago, arising in both North America and Eurasia. Many of the Nimravid member species again look remarkably like cats in their overall bodies and skull anatomy, and this did indeed cause the first paleontologists to study these animals to classify them within Felidae. However, there are many subtle differences between the groups that clearly indicate their separate origins. Various openings in the skull are different in Nimravids compared to Felids, and the inner ear is constructed very differently. Plus, Nimravids would have walked about not on their toes like true cats, but in a more flat-footed style, a condition known as being plantigrade. The long saber teeth of certain Nimravid species are also generally more conical and not as flattened from side to side as in the true saber-toothed cats. The Nimravids varied in dimensions from house cat-sized species to jaguar and lion-sized ones, such as Hoplophonius in North America and Quercylurus from France. Nimravids would mostly have been ambush predators, likely preying on extinct kinds of hoofed mammals, including early horses and rhino relatives. The Nimravids became extinct in North America some 26 million years ago, resulting in what's come to be known as the cat gap, the absence of any cat-like predators on the continent for 7.5 million years, until the Felids spread to North America from Eurasia about 18.5 million years ago. Another feliform lineage with a contested classification history is Barbourofelidae. These are more saber-toothed cat-like mammals that researchers previously considered to be a distinct family from the Nimravids, although some more recent work suggests they may in fact be a subgrouping of them. The Barbourofelids first show up in the fossil record about 17 million years ago, and mainly inhabited Eurasia and Africa. One genus, the massive Barbourofilus, made it over to North America some 13.6 million years ago, where it prowled the ancient landscapes until about 7 million years ago. This animal had enormous saber teeth, accompanied by large flanges of bone on the lower jaw, into which the canines would slot. Similar flanges are also seen in some Nimravid species, such as Eusmilus. The reappearance of massive saber teeth and the overall cat-like anatomy of the Barbourofelids again suggests these were hypercarnivorous ambush predators, filling a cat niche while also coexisting with the true saber-toothed cats, the Machairodontines, throughout the time the Barbourofelids existed for. The question of whether or not the Barbourofelids are their own distinct lineage or are a subfamily within the Nimravids is relevant to our discussion of convergent evolution. If the Barbourofelids are separate from other feliforms, then very cat-like forms with saber teeth would have convergently evolved within the feliforms on at least 3 different occasions. However, if, as recent research is leaning towards, the Barbourofelids are a subfamily of Nimravids, then there are only 2 convergent lineages. Still, the degree of convergence is pretty impressive. This brings us to the next group of remarkably cat-like mammals, and this time the convergence is undeniable. There once existed a lineage of marsupial relatives that evolved some very similar features to cats. The marsupials are the pouched mammals, species that today include kangaroos, koalas, possums, and various others, and they diverged from the placental mammals more than 110 million years ago. Such an ancient split means that this is a truly astonishing instance of convergence on a similar body plan. More specifically, the marsupial relatives we're looking at here are the Sparassodonts, a lineage of marsupialiforms. so not true marsupials but very close extinct relatives of them. Among the Sparassodonts, it was the family Thylacosmilidae which produced some very cat-like species. The Thylacosmilids first appeared about 21 million years ago and survived until 3 million years ago, inhabiting South America. At this time, South America was a realm dominated by Sparassodonts, many of which convergently evolved similar body plans to other modern placental predators, such as wolf and hyena-like species. Some Sparassodonts may also have been omnivorous. The most well-known of the Thylacosmilids is the jaguar-sized species Thylacosmilus atrox, known from Argentina and living between about 7 and 3 million years ago. This predator would have been truly spectacular to see in the flesh. As in various other cat-like lineages, Thylacosmilus again had fearsome-looking saber-toothed canines, and overall it had a superficially cat-like body plan. Plus, it also had very prominent flanges on the mandible that the canines would have slotted into, making this another convergence with the Barbourofelids. However, upon looking closer at Thylacosmilus, numerous interesting differences also become apparent. Its skull anatomy was rather unique, as it possessed dome-shaped maxillary bones that would have given its face an almost bulbous appearance. The canine teeth of Thylacosmilus would also continuously grow throughout life, unlike those of felids. In addition, the shape of the enormous teeth was different from felid saber-tooths, having a subtriangular shape in cross-section rather than being blade-like. The other teeth in the mouth were also quite different, as these marsupialiform saber-tooths seem to have had highly reduced incisors, while the rest of the teeth are rather small and there's no evidence of carnassial-like teeth evolving, those specialized teeth that act like scissors to shear flesh found in the mouths of cats, dogs, and other members of carnivora. As for the rest of the body, various convergences with true saber-toothed cats are apparent, driven by similar selection pressures and possibly hunting styles. The neck was relatively long and powerfully muscled, similar to saber-toothed species such as Homotherium. However, Thylacosmilus would not have had retractable claws, and seemingly had more robust but shorter limbs than a typical cat. Its front feet were semi-digitigrade, meaning they didn't walk fully on their toes like true cats, and the back feet were plantigrade, like the Nimravids we saw earlier. There's been some discussion over how exactly Thylacosmilus would have behaved and hunted too. It seems it was probably an ambush predator, and was not suited to pursuing prey over long distances. Its bones also show signs that it was well adapted for standing up on its hind limbs in an erect position, leading some paleontologists to hypothesize that in some ways, it may have behaved more like a bear than a cat. Older ideas about Thylacosmilus's lifestyle assumed that it was a super saber-toothed predator, due to the formidable teeth that actually dwarf those of many placentals, picturing this animal as a highly specialized hypercarnivore that wielded its ever-growing canines in a similar way to the Machairodontines. However, recent research has pointed out a lot of differences between the anatomy of Thylacosmilus and saber-toothed cats, and stated that it may in fact have been a specialized scavenger, perhaps using its long teeth to pry open carcasses so that it could feed on the soft internal organs. But other researchers disagree, and find support for Thylacosmilus still being an active predator, with powerful neck musculature suited to driving its canines into prey, although it might still have been a specialist feeder on internal organs, since characteristic wear markings on its teeth suggest it was mainly eating soft foods and avoided biting into bone. But Thylacosmilus was not the only time that the marsupialiforms converged on cat-like features. In prehistoric Australia, there existed the so-called marsupial lion, a ferocious predator named Thylacoleo. The most recent species, Thylacoleo carnifex, survived until as recently as about 40,000 years ago and was the biggest mammalian predator we know to have evolved in Australia. Thylacoleo is a true marsupial, not just a marsupialiform, and belongs to the Vombatiform suborder, so it's a close relative of the living wombats and the koala, but independently evolved some parts of anatomy that resemble felids. One of the most interesting examples of this convergence can be found in the teeth, as Thylacoleo had enlarged premolar teeth on the upper and lower jaws, which were very blade-like in shape and operated just like the specialized carnassial teeth of cats and other carnivorans, to shear off chunks of flesh. So this marsupial, separated from placental carnivorans for more than 100 million years, had independently evolved this very specific bit of toothy weaponry. That's some pretty astonishing convergent evolution. The rest of Thylacoleo's dentition was rather different to cats, however. The canines were absent on the lower jaw and very tiny on the upper jaw, and it was instead the incisors that had become very large and functioned like cat canines. These terrifying looking jaws were driven by some impressive musculature, as paleontologists have calculated that Thylacoleo had the most powerful bite force for its body size of any known mammal. Another pretty cool specific convergence is the fact that Thylacoleo had retractable claws on its thumbs. But unlike cats, only the thumbs had retractable claws, and these thumbs were also semi-opposable, capable of a rather high degree of motion. Combined with evidence that Thylacoleo had particularly maneuverable forearms, it appears that this killer koala relative would use them to grab prey items and then dispatch them with their deadly claws. So Thylacoleo would likely have relied on its arms while hunting prey even more than cats generally do. Thylacoleo was also probably a very good climber, and might have leapt down from trees onto unwary animals below. Quite a terrifying thought, really. So the marsupial's answer to a cat was a truly fearsome predator that must have been incredible to see in the flesh, and with a fascinating mixture of cat-like characteristics as well as entirely unique anatomical features. Next, we're going to take a quick detour away from the prehistoric world to look at some examples of modern mammals that have convergently evolved some cat-like features. Firstly, the fossa.
The dreaded Fossa.
The Fossa! The Fossa attacking!
This species, technically named Cryptoprocta ferox, is native to Madagascar and is another example of a feliform, the suborder that cats are also members of. However, genetic evidence shows that the lineage the fossa belongs to, the Malagasy carnivorans, all descend from a single colonization event of the island some 24 to 18 million years ago. This family, which today includes 10 still living species, is most closely related to the mongooses. So there's some clear evidence for convergent evolution in this instance. A population of ancestrally quite mongoose-like mammals must have rafted over from the African mainland and gave rise to the Malagasy carnivorans, which millions of years later in turn gave rise to a cat-like species, the fossa. This is the largest carnivore found in Madagascar. It's a splendid predator that evolved to prey on lemurs and other small to medium-sized vertebrate animals.
It's a cookbook! It's a cookbook!
They are adept tree climbers, quickly navigating branches and tree trunks to hunt down their primate prey. Overall, the fossa looks quite a lot like a cougar, though with a sleeker and proportionally longer body, plus a particularly elongated tail used to help balance as it climbs through the trees. The skull is also a bit more lengthened than a cat's, but it does have a fairly blunted snout, similar to a felid. Remarkably, the fossa also has semi-retractable claws. Though they aren't concealed by sheaths like in cats, they can be extended and then partially pulled back. The fossa is therefore another incredible instance of a lineage of mammals adapting to a new environment that lacked any native cat-like predators and converging on various anatomical features as they became suited to hunting in a cat-like fashion. Another example of living mammals that I'll briefly mention are the species of the marsupial genus Dasyurus, the Quolls, sometimes also called the native cat. Although they don't look tremendously like cats at first glance, the Quolls, native to Australia and New Guinea, can be considered the ecological equivalents of true cats among modern marsupials. 6 species of Quolls survive today, and they are all effective climbers that hunt at night and shelter in burrows during the day. The tiger quoll, at 1.25 meters in total length, including the tail, is the biggest surviving native mammalian carnivore on mainland Australia today, other than the dingo. Despite their fairly non-cat-like appearance, it's their role as small and medium-sized predators of other small vertebrates that's led some to consider them cat equivalents in terms of habits. Sadly, the introduction of domestic cats and foxes into Australia has been devastating to quoll populations, as these predators hunt them and compete with them for the same food sources. So far, we've only looked at mammals, and a few of them have been fairly cat-adjacent already in terms of their relationships. But now I'm going to throw a major curveball at you. What if I were to tell you that there was a croc which convergently evolved with cats? I promise I'm not making this up. There was a species of crocodiliform, so not a member of the group that includes modern crocodiles but still related to them, called Pakasuchus, which has a skull and teeth remarkably like a cat. In fact, the name Pakasuchus even comes from the Swahili word paka, meaning cat. This crocodiliform lived more than 70 million years ago and was uncovered in southwestern Tanzania. It was a small animal, about half a meter in length, and was a fully terrestrial species. Its skull is short and broad, with a robust lower jaw and very distinctive teeth, which are differentiated into 3 different types, much more like the condition in mammals, instead of other crocs, which tend to have teeth that are mostly the same shape all the way along the jaws. At the front of the mouth, Pakasuchus had caniniform teeth resembling the true canines of cats and other carnivorans, behind which sat premolariform teeth and then molariform teeth. So this reptile, which evolved from ancestors with jaws full of similarly shaped conical teeth, evolved specialized groups of teeth that performed specific functions, just like in mammals. The molariform teeth even look very similar to the carnassials of cats, and likely worked in the same way, shearing off pieces of flesh from their prey. One paleontologist even stated that if only the teeth had been discovered, separate from the rest of the croc skeleton, then there's a good chance these molariform teeth could have been mistaken for a mammal's. The foreshortened low skull of Pakasuchus, along with its slender body and proportionally long limbs, are more features that make this astonishing croc really seem like a reptilian cat. Strangely though, Pakasuchus did still have heavy bony armor plates on its tail, called osteoderms, which seems to contradict the agile nature of the rest of this animal's body. So clearly it was a very unique animal, and it's a fantastic creature to finish off this look at every time things evolved into cats. I hope you enjoyed learning about all these incredible cases of convergent evolution, and I hope you appreciated the real stars of this episode, Grendel, Morgana, and Elsa. I tried to explain convergent evolution to them too, but they didn't really care.
Grendel, do you want to hear about convergent evolution? Did you know that cats have evolved like lots of different times? She doesn't care.
Please do let me know in the comments what other instances of convergence you'd like to see me cover next. There are still so many amazing different cases to go through, so I'll do my best to get to as many as possible. And yes, one of those will eventually be the fabled crab convergence video. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to my other channel, 7 Days of Science. Over on this channel, I and my co-presenters make weekly videos covering all the most fascinating science news of the past week. So if you'd like a good way to keep up with the latest discoveries, you might like what we do over there. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please do like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it. And be sure to press that bell icon so you don't miss our next upload and so you can learn more about our world, its history, and the wonderful life that surrounds us all.